Yes. Okay. All right. Thank you. Good afternoon. And thank you for letting everybody having a massage. Everybody's nice and relaxed and awake again. And for me as well, it felt good. My name is Tijmen, and it is a little bit difficult to pronounce. Sorry, you can call me Damon or Timmy, whichever you prefer. I want to start with saying that this is my first time to the Philippines, and it's been amazing this week. So I want to thank you all for your hospitality, your openness, and for showing us everything that you've seen this week, and for sharing and exchanging knowledge. And, wonderful already. So I'll keep you close to my heart. All right. I'm from Rotterdam University, and I'm actually a lecturer, professor in water management. That's my background, and I've also got a background in sustainable development. I've been working as a consultant for about 9 years, before I shifted to the University of Rotterdam. And one of the reasons was actually that as a person, I'm a really avid surfer. So I've been around the world a bit, surfed everywhere, been to the most beautiful places, pristine beaches, but full of plastic. Like anywhere where I went, there was plastics. And that got me thinking, and I started a foundation, which is called Survival Foundation. It's a Dutch chapter for a worldwide organization focusing on grassroots projects on addressing issues along the beach for clean seas, clean beaches, and clean water quality. So really empowering local communities to deal with issues at hand and having campaigns and mobilizing people. And that's what I really wanted to do. I was working as a consultant, was happy with my job, but I thought I could do more, especially on topics like this. Mobilizing people, getting people active, and especially with students, doing that is wonderful. So that's also the reason why I'm here, and I'm gonna tell you shortly something about plastics and, well, how we could address that. All right, short on plastics. I've told this earlier before this week, so I'll go through it a little bit quickly, but I want to address the importance of some characteristics of plastic. Because plastic is a fantastic material. It's been produced since early 20th century, but really from the 1950s or so on, we've been producing it in mass production. It's made up of polymers, easily manufactured, it's low cost, impervious to water, it's quite super easy to have it in a water bottle, and it's long lasting. And I asked earlier this week, how long does plastic last on average? And I think most people agree that it, well, would last maybe 50, maybe 100 years before plastic is really gone. But the hard answer is actually plastic is never really gone. Because it's made up of polymers, it breaks up in polymers. It breaks up in smaller strings of this polymer. It's not biodegradable. It just isn't. It stays within the environment pretty much forever. It just breaks down in smaller pieces of plastic, turn into microplastics or even nanoplastics, which are plastic pieces smaller than 300 microns. Microscopically small. We've got a lot of plastics. As I said, since the 1950s, we've been really producing it. And by 2010, we produced more than 310 million tons annually. And that has been an increase of about threefold since the 1990s, so in just 20 years. But it's bound to go sky high in 2050, up to more than 1 billion tons annually, which we're going to produce. It's because we've got growing welfare, but also growing population numbers. So there's going to be more and more plastics, which we just don't really get rid of. And this morning someone said, what is something in attitude towards plastics? We just throw it away. And that's actually how it was introduced. Plastic was introduced as a super easy product because you can just throw it away. That was how plastic was introduced in the 1950s. Disposable items, throw away living. So we can just throw it away. That's the conception we have about plastics. It's easy to just get rid of. but you just don't really get rid of, as I said. Plastics are never really gone unless you burn it. But only 14%, or actually no, new studies indicate even 9%, get incinerated. And the rest of it, small part, finally only 2% is closed loop recycling. That really is circular economy. The rest of it ends up in landfills or seeps straight into the environment. So this is where my interest is. I'm a water manager by nature and interested in sustainable issues by background. So I stumbled upon this issue, like how can I deal with this as a water manager? What can we do with it? To give you a bit of an indication about how we deal with plastics, I heard someone say today that we don't have waste in the Netherlands. We actually do have quite a lot of waste. If you look at how much we have, that's pretty much just as much as the Philippines. The difference is in the waste management. So that's what I want to tell you something about. And this is just something about what we know about plastics, because we don't know that much. All we know about how much plastic comes to the environment is mainly based on metadata on river discharges, average waste, recovery rates, and population numbers. So there's a lot of research to be done to know more. Well, the thing about what's the problem with plastics coming into the environment, it has several impacts. One is that it endangers wildlife, it hampers ecosystem functioning, because there's lots of chemicals usually connected to plastics, or it gets plastic or gets chemicals easily attached to them, which leak into the ecosystem. And it also has an impact on human health. As I said, that plastics become micro and nanoplastics even, and that they come in the food chain, and the food chain, we're usually on top of it. So there's a global need to address it, but also on local scale, of course, there's major impacts, especially on water system functioning, but also on health and sanitation. It's a breeding ground for bacterial growth, or just all kinds of conditions which are favorable, not for water quality, but for biohazards, etc. And of course, it's just not that pretty either. So, what we really need, as you saw, waste management. Waste management is a super difficult topic, and I am not a waste management expert, but I can tell you something about how we did it in the Netherlands, what the transition was, and what, in my opinion, could be strategies to be implemented here in Cebu. So, I want to tell you that we need to make a transition from pollution to solution. It sounds easy. What I really mean is we need to go from waste to resource. I don't think this doesn't work. But this friendly man here, he's from Ambon in Indonesia, and we just got this movie clip this week. There's two students who actually joined the elective module on plastic soup, and they're doing a project now in Ambon, Indonesia, to also deal with plastics and to get them into recycling schemes and really properly use plastic. And this man, he's standing there with these big bags full of small fragmented pieces of plastics, which have already been shredded. And what he's saying is, money, 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 money. He's really seeing the plastics as a resource. He isn't seeing it as waste. He is thinking, this is what I'm going to make money with. So, to tell you something about the history of waste management in the Netherlands. In the 1900s, relatively small population still, we could deal, with just landfills and dumping. And it was a get rid of waste mentality, waste really to get disposed of. And that went pretty well, but we used it for all kinds of things. We used it for land reclamation and things like that. It's been put everywhere. And then in 1972, the Club of Rome had limits to growth. Famous article about that there's limits to how far we can grow, that we're depleting resources. So people started slowly thinking about, okay, if we're growing and ever growing, how can we deal with waste? So we came to the understanding that waste is a bit of a problem, What do we need to do with waste? And the problem became even bigger because population population was growing, the welfare was growing, plastics were becoming introduced more and more and more. So there were limits to capacity. So there was a necessity for legislation. So the first legislation in the Netherlands came on in the 1970s, late 1970s, and that was based on municipalities being responsible for collection and disposal, and actually the provinces being the coordinating agencies on where different kinds of waste go, and fully based on landfilling and incineration. So there was a working model for that. However, as time grew, population grew, welfare grew, we came into a serious waste crisis, actually. Capacity was just, it was just a big lack of capacity. All landfills were overflowing, there were landfills everywhere, the logistics became really, really complex. And also from example, for incineration plants, they led to high dioxin loads coming into areas, and they found actually high levels of dioxins in milk from cow pastures in the area. So big health effects just from incinerating as well, and as well from the landfills, a big seepage, like leaching from chemicals into the environment. So a big public debate also arose of people really saying, like, we need to deal with this waste. This waste is threatening our livelihood, you know, it's threatening our society, our welfare, our well-being. So we really need to deal with that. And then in 1986, a Dutch politician called Lansing, he introduced Lansing's ladder. And this is well known, and this has been the basis for circular economy. It's been introduced in 1986, and it actually says reduce is the best you can do. Reducing waste is the key. Capacity will always be a problem, and how lesser we have to deal with, how easier it becomes. The second is reusing. If you reuse, you don't have to reproduce, so it means still keeping waste at a level. Below that is recycling, and in recycling you've got different levels as well. We talk about downcycling often, when, for example, plastic bottles become recycled and they become like a pretty low value type of plastic, which is can be used only for a small amount of purposes. And upcycling, when you use, for example, plastic bottles to build compartments for a high technology car like the new electric BMW. Then from D, you get energy recovery, and with energy recovery, it's also for part on live food stocks, so making oils from plastics. And incineration and landfills are at the bottom. It's the least we can do. And there's actually a divide between C and D, because up to D, it's a linear approach. It ends where you burn the fuel or where you burn the plastics for energy. And you come into a circular approach where you look into recycling, reuse, and reduce. And the circular approach is really important because in the Netherlands, we actually understood that waste is a resource. There's money to be made in waste. One of the biggest waste management organizations in the Netherlands, their slogan is, there is no such thing as waste. Yeah. And it's a waste management company. And they say waste doesn't exist. They see waste as a resource. However, just introducing this didn't really help that far at first, but by legislation and by public demand and by innovation, we came into different new legislations and especially differentiated waste streams. So at first, glass and paper and cardboard were phased out, later on organic materials, and now we phased out plastics for a big part as well. But however, since complexity of waste streams grew, there was a need for a national waste management organization, really dividing about where should waste go and within which regions are we going to transport waste. And this is where we ended up now. We're really thinking in the Netherlands that waste is a resource. And the latest thing is actually that there's been a research done about plastics. We've been collecting plastics since about 4 years on a big scale. And there was actually research done that there's a limit as well to how much plastic we can handle. since in the Netherlands the waste stream is segregated, but it's mainly on all plastics go into one bag. But there could be even more segregation. So we'll probably have to go into another scheme of innovation and new segregation and maybe even new legislation to even improve that and to really climb the ladder. And as well, we need to reduce. Okay, why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this because there's certain lessons to be learned from this, because there's several drivers which have been initiating the change in waste management in the Netherlands. First of it, all policies which were implemented, they were all problem driven. There's really a necessity to act, especially based on capacity. You know, with capacity limits, you really need to do something. That was the first reason. But also public demand, it's really important. The public notion of the waste problem and also the awareness of problems for the health and environment have been a really important factor driving the waste industries in the Netherlands to adopt other strategies. But most of all, maybe, which has been a driving force, has been long-term ambitions. The ambition has been set in the 1980s and 90s to really climb the ladder and really go towards a circular economy. It's being embedded now more and more in the Dutch strategies, and I think the goal now is to, by 2030 or 35, I'm not sure, to have a fully circular economy. Bart has been really busy on that as well. It's been a major topic, as he's told in Rotterdam University as well, on how can you incorporate circular thinking, so not linear with an end, but circular. How can you reuse, recycle resources, and use that as a business model. And because of these long-term ambitions, innovation and market mechanisms for privatization have been set into effect. If you set a long-term goal and you give a point of where you want to go, where you need to go, and you focus legislation on that as well, that will give an incentive to innovation in the market. And that really matches transition management principles. Because the working field of transition management, it's about long-term thinking and shared ambition. It involves multi-stakeholders, so private, public, and social communities, to really determine where do we want to go and how do we want to address that. It really involves learning by doing and doing by learning. It's really a learning process. We didn't know back in the 1980s exactly how our recycling schemes were going to look like. It's been a process of learning and innovation and of trying different things, because that's what it is. It's about system improvement and innovation by creating multiple options. So you really have to have a focus, which is not only top-down and saying, this is what we're going to do and we're going to create legislation for it, but you've got to create opportunity, especially for these last three. Learning by doing, system improvement, so you can get to system improvement and create multiple options. Really try what works and what doesn't. So, if we go to Cebu, we want to climb that ladder. And maybe we want to even jump it. And like Dr. Flores said, the Cebu shortcut, that could be as well for waste management. Okay? You can start down the ladder and say we're going to go from landfill to incineration or to energy. But I think there's a jump to be made. You can skip the first few steps and go straight into recycling. And of course, reuse and reduce are always important. But climbing the ladder, if I use the principles of waste transition management on waste, then we can see some things which are already happening or which we could get going. And that's really about shared ambition between communities and municipalities. Everyone has a shared interest in really addressing waste. No one wants to live with waste. Everybody wants to have a healthy and clean environment. So there is a shared interest, and there should be shared ambition coupled to that as well. What's the ambition of communities? What's the ambition of municipalities to deal with? And from that, if you got that shared ambition, how can you look at local initiatives? So if you go to multi-domain and multi-option strategies, don't focus on one big scheme, but go and focus on what's possible at a local, small scale in waste collection, local recycling streams, and really try and learn together. So form the triple helix constructions to really see what kind of projects can we evolve, and what can we learn from that, and how can we come to possible solutions. Because the problem is complex, you know. I don't have the answer, and there is not one answer. There should be multiple answers to address this issue to go to the strategy of circular thinking. So really, learning by doing. So what can we do? Well, what we did this week was just really a first step, really the first preliminary reconnaissance. We're trying to get the problem defined, so what's really happening, what is the issues at hand. And we did a first preliminary analysis on composition. And this is what we found while measuring at the Guadalupe river mouth. And not surprisingly, the majority is plastics. And this result is actually a little bit biased because the other two pretty big parts are glass fragments, so just shattered bottles, and shattered tiles. But it also shows you immediately one thing: these tiles, they don't float downstream, they are local waste. Whereas the plastics, this is how we measured actually, and the plastics were mainly made up, or the most found item of all items found was plastic bags. Plastic bags float easily down the stream. So already just one measurement we did shows two things. One, waste is a problem from local, but also regional impacts. And two, plastics is the main issue, and plastic bags is what you'll find most along waterways. So we also found out that measuring is quite difficult actually, because especially rivers, they're so diverse in their morphological aspects in riverbanks, so we couldn't access everywhere. And also, if you look at where we measured, if you go to the other side of the river, you would get a different kind of measurement, especially in numbers, maybe not in composition. So we learned quite a lot of that. And also, we've been talking to quite a lot of people, and what I said before, also communities feel a sense of urgency on what to do with, or on that we have to address waste and plastic waste in particular. So from that, we've been talking about some next steps which we can do. Some of them have been roughly addressed by Professor Flores already. As said, we have an elective module on plastic soup, and we've been having some cases already on Cebu. And what we would like to do is, from the ideas we get this week, we would like to elaborate further on that in this elective module and really let students work on business plans. So business models for different kinds of solutions. I'll get back to that later on. We're looking into possible funding, as just been told by Professor Rick. Yeah, there's possibilities to get interns and graduates, hopefully, for the next years. Oh, that's too quick. We did measurements, and we got quite some results from it, actually. We also did measurements in Rotterdam. We're going to compare those. We really want to know how much gets lost in the chain. That's for one, just for the scientific necessity, but also to see what should we focus on. So this preliminary result showed plastic bags. That might be a proper direction, okay? That should be something to focus policies and strategies on. So measuring really helps you to address what are the most important topics. And of course, we want to maintain a learning process. Well, maybe a little bit more specific. We would like to measure in the rivers, so not on river banks, that's what we did now, but we would like to measure in the rivers how much plastic actually goes through it. And we could do that, for example, by using the underwater drones of Dr. Flores. There's one group of students already busy looking at how can we use turbidity meters to measure maybe plastics in water flows. Also for waste traps, there's been a lot going on already. That might also be interesting for student groups to work on already now as input for finally November 2018, when the river summit is here. That's on technical aspects, but as we've heard before, there's a lot of social aspects involved, and reducing waste is really key. That's what we want to focus on as well. So it would be really interesting to look together what can we do about awareness and education, setting up workshops with local communities on raising awareness on certain topics, and how can we deal with that. And it might even be interesting to incorporate in the pressure cooker for next year, maybe. And last but not least, economic incentives. It's always about economics. And understanding that really it's not cheap to dump or to use a landfill. That's not a cheap solution. it actually costs money. It doesn't give you any revenue. Whereas when you go looking into recycling schemes, there's money to be made. As I said, this company in the Netherlands, there is no waste. They're making a lot of money in their waste recycling processes and really producing resources. Okay, I think I'm through my time, isn't it? But so I had some best practices to show. This one might be interesting to tell shortly. It's a Dutch social enterprise. So it's a company with a commercial attitude, but then not really making money. They've got a system or a process in recycling plastics on location on a small scale. And instead of creating waste streams from local communities, they focus on creating resource streams. So if you go and recycle plastics and different kinds of plastics, you could get resource streams out of your community instead of waste streams. They work together with NGOs and private companies and really try and get people involved, look at the triple helix construction again. To get this going on a local scale. It might be interesting to look at feasibility studies for this kind of enterprises for the coming year. Recycled Islands, also floating garden. It's a floating garden made from recycled plastics from the river. And it's actually been realized. And it's a funny thing because it's also done by an architect, so I don't know about architects and floating gardens, but it's a hot thing in architecture world. But this has been a prototype which has been realized also with a lot of effort from students from the water management department. And so this plastic is made from plastics fished from the river. And they've done that by using this litter trap, and also by collecting waste from riverbanks. So there's a couple of these waste traps in Rotterdam right now. But there's different ones. This is another one where a student has been working on. It's in the harbor. It's actually a product from Tau, also the consultancy company of Dr. Bogart. And there's a big one, which you might have seen once, the ocean cleanup. It's an incredible feat which focuses on collecting all waste from the oceans. As I said, all plastic ends up somewhere, and most of it ends up in the oceans. The oceans act as the sink for plastics, and they've set the goal to clean up the oceans. But since that is really an end-of-pipe measure, they're now focusing more on rivers. And they contacted me to say, like, okay, how can we do this? How can we measure plastics in rivers? And can we set up a research goal together? And they focus as well on the Philippines and Indonesia, especially Asia, because it's one of the major contributors to plastics in the ocean. So there's already a lot of knowledge, as we said before, best practices, communities of practice that could happen for this as well. And last but not least, this is the Longanisa, which has also been shown, which was a student project realized in Manila, also to catch as well organic as plastic waste. And there was a construction made, which was really fit for purpose in that location. But we could really get projects going on, okay, how can we develop waste traps for different locations, for different situations. Those are magnificent student projects. But you can also do lots of things with recycling a building. This is a building in the Philippines, made from plastic bottles. This as well, this is plastic bottles stuffed with other plastics. So get all your plastics together, stuff them in bottles, get them in chicken wire mesh constructions, and use it as construction material. Could be an interesting way as well, maybe even in combination with small flood defenses or heightening of locations which get flooded easily. Just ideas which I'm just throwing at you. And the last one, it's really small scale recycling, as I've said before. This is just a grinder of local plastics. People can put their bottles in and it just get grinded. And there's a small melting installation and a 3D printer connected to it. But it could also be done by presses. There's examples of using solar ovens to melt plastics and really just force them into small molds and get small products out of it, which can also generate a local economics by just recycling on a real local scale. Not only get raw materials out of it, so raw plastics, but even get small products out of it. And there's actually been an example, I think, here in Cebu of one of the Bangarais, Well done, guys. That's it. we actually got a system a little bit like this going, and together they managed to lower their total waste stream from the barangay of 30%. And instead of driving 7 times a day with a truck, they have to drive only 3 or 4 times, which also lowered costs a lot. So there's a lot of local incentives, and these incentives, these small scale things, that's I think where we all together can focus on, and small changes finally create big changes. So some of our small efforts can create a big change, and that's what I want to follow up on. And I definitely like to talk to you about how can we get these small measures going together. Thank you.